They hated the results of the 2016 election and want to use this impeachment process to further their political agenda.
This cannot be the future of America. We cannot have presidents inciting and mobilizing mob violence against our government.
A second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump begins in the Senate. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Marcella Lee, in for Barbara Lee Edwards.
I'm Carlo Cicchetto. The former president is charged with inciting the riot on Capitol Hill back on January 6th that led to the deaths of 5 people, including a Capitol police officer. As
News 8's Shannon Handy shows us, senators today considered the constitutionality of the historic trial.
Marcella and Carlos, senators voted to move forward with this trial following several hours of debate. Today's proceedings started with a video presentation showing a timeline of events on January 6th, the day of the insurrection.
That video presentation included footage of rioters as well as Capitol Police as they tried to gain control. Next, we saw the moment lawmakers learned those rioters had entered the building.
And it will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
We'll pause.
Lead impeachment manager Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland tearfully recounted the conversation he had with his 24-year-old daughter and her husband, who were visiting that day and had to lock themselves in his office.
She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol." Of all the terrible, brutal things I saw and I heard on that day, and since then, that one hit me the hardest.
Despite emotional testimony, Tuesday's trial centered around whether or not impeachment proceedings are constitutional against a president no longer in office. Trump is charged with inciting the deadly riot. Trump's attorneys argued the proceedings aren't just unlawful, they're political and will wind up dividing the country even more.
A chance by a group of partisan politicians seeking to eliminate Donald Trump from the American political scene and seeking to disenfranchise 74 million plus American voters and those who dare to share their political beliefs and vision of America.
Meanwhile, Raskin said if the former president isn't held accountable, it could set a bad precedent.
In other words, conduct that would be a high crime and misdemeanor in your first year as president, and your second year as president, and your third year as president, and for the vast majority of your fourth year as president, you can suddenly do in your last few weeks in office without facing any constitutional accountability at all.
On this vote,
in the end, senators voted to move forward with the impeachment, with 56 voting yea, including 6 Republicans, and 44 voting nay.
Republican Bill Cassidy of Louisiana was one of the senators who sided with Democrats. He was one of the only Republicans to change his vote at the last minute. These proceedings will continue tomorrow at noon.
And today, the fight was on with county supervisors over a vote for vaccinating police officers, moving them up on the vaccination tiers.
News 8's Brandon Lewis has the story.
Now, Carlo and Marcella, this simply didn't have the votes of Democrats and wasn't supported by Public Health Officer Wilma Wooten. The resolution was put forward by Supervisor Joel Anderson, who argued that he wanted law enforcement to get the vaccine because they are putting themselves more at risk, but it wasn't supported by some essential workers who called into the meeting.
How can we possibly exclude our law enforcement when they are critical to many parts of the county?
Supervisor Joel Anderson put forward a measure to prioritize the county's law enforcement officers in line to get the coronavirus vaccine. He says they often put themselves in harm's way and risk getting or spreading the potentially deadly virus.
If they're struck down by COVID, yes, they, like firefighters and other physically fit young people, they're not likely to die, but others may die because they weren't there to protect them.
The idea gained momentum in recent weeks as more chiefs and department heads spoke up, but it faced opposition from callers at the meeting who said law enforcement is no different than other essential workers who are part of Phase 1B. EMTs and cross-trained firefighters got their vaccines early only because they can now vaccinate others. Police officers cannot.
Police officers are no more important than those workers and should not be skipping the line while everyone else is still waiting for their turn.
Previously, county officials claimed they were following state guidelines, which places officers and deputies in a lower tier. But this week it shifted, saying they want to reserve vaccines for the most vulnerable. Public Health Officer Wilma Wooten compared them to those who can get vaccinated now, saying officers make up less than 1/4 of 1% of all cases and even fewer of the deaths.
While no death is insignificant, our 65 years of age and older represents 79% of all of those individuals that have died, while we've had 2 deaths with law enforcement attributable to COVID-19, which is 0.1%.
It's worth pointing out this was only a recommendation. It was not a mandate to vaccinate law enforcement. That decision, had this passed, would have rested with Public Health Officer Wilma Wooten, who did not support the measure today. Carlo and Marcelo.
Thanks, Brandon. And we're asking tonight, should vaccination be based on age or occupation? You've responded on social media. Tammy Padilla on our Facebook page said both should be taken into consideration. Susan L. Peters-Baker says, age and health conditions. Occupation, she says, shouldn't matter. I'm in Tier 1B and would give up my spot for another who needs it more. Elaine Ludlam-Dye, vaccinate over 65 and teachers ASAP. Cindy Mack says in tiers, in orders, health, age, and occupation are the priorities she thinks we should be making them. And Julie G. Leonard says underlying conditions should be at the top of the list. We've heard many varieties of all these sentiments on our social media platforms, and you can still weigh in on any of our social media platforms. And thank you to all of you who've already chimed in on this conversation.
Health leaders are reporting a second straight day of new COVID-19 cases under 1,000. 789 new cases were reported today, and while under that 1,000 mark, it is nearly 100 more than yesterday. The daily positivity rate is about 6% of the more than 12,000 tests taken, and the 2-week rolling average is now below 7%. That is good news. 32 new deaths, however, were reported today, bringing the county death toll to 2,853. Staff of the Oceanside Unified School District are giving an update on their plans to return to in-person classes at a school board meeting happening right now. Earlier this afternoon, parents and students demanded a return to in-person classes, taking their complaints to the district office. They say the district isn't trying hard enough to reopen and say they feel left behind watching other districts send their students back to campus. In a statement to News 8, the Oceanside Unified School District says it empathizes with parents and is working toward a return to in-person classes as soon as it is safe to do so.
We now know the name of a skateboarder who was hit and killed on the UC San Diego campus. Police say 19-year-old Carlos Sotelo was riding a skateboard down a steep hill about 11:30 Saturday night when he fell. A 20-year-old driver wasn't able to stop in time and ran over Sotelo while he was still lying in the road. Sotelo died at the scene. According to the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, Sotelo was a first-year electrical engineering student from Lake Elsinore.
Former San Diego Chargers head coach Marty Schottenheimer has died at the age of 77 after a long battle with Alzheimer's disease.
Schottenheimer led 4 franchises through his coaching career. He took the helm here in San Diego in 2002. Our own Kyle Kraska was there for all 5 of his seasons as head coach. Kyle, it was an experience working with him, wasn't it?
An experience, to say the least. Just an incredible personality, an incredible man who cared so much about you as a person, not just you as the football player. I was just so sad to hear of the passing of Marty Schottenheimer today, the former Chargers coach. He and his family had been battling Alzheimer's since 2014. Yes, Marty came to San Diego January of 2002. He coached 5 seasons here. His best was 2006 when the Chargers posted a record of 14-2, but lost in the divisional round of the postseason to the New England Patriots. Shockingly, Marty was fired. He coached 21 seasons with 4 different teams. His 200 NFL coaching victories are 7th all time, but he never made it to the Super Bowl. Marty was well known for his smash mouth style of primarily running the football, dubbed Marty Ball. And LaDainian Tomlinson was one of the beneficiaries. It helped make LT a Hall of Famer. And during his enshrinement speech in Canton, Ohio, he gave Schottenheimer his due.
I spent 9 years with the San Diego Chargers. Head coach Marty Schottenheimer was the best coach I ever had, and we won 5 division titles. Marty, would you and your wife Pat please stand to be acknowledged?
What a moment that was. You know, Marty talked about football. He said how much he loved football and how much he loved coaching football. But the thing that he loved most of all is the woman you just saw right there. That was his wife, Pat, of 53 years. Pat is survived also, Marty is survived also by his 2 children and also 4 grandchildren. But family came first with Marty Schottenheimer, and that's the way he's coached his football team, with a lot of care. And that's why his players loved him so much.
He was such a fixture in our lives for so many years, and LT had the best tribute. A little teary-eyed, I think a lot of us are today, absolutely.
No doubt about it. We're going to miss Marty Schottenheimer.
Some of his players fiercely devoted to him. Thanks, Kyle.